closed session. In the UK, we have something called Chatham House Rules. Do you know what that means? So Chatham House is an actual house in London where for hundreds of years they had a rule which is everything is offline. Okay? So if you ask me a question, I will do my best to answer honestly. I'm going to show you some confidential content because I want to make sure that the opportunity I have to present to you is useful to you. Okay? So please interrupt with questions. Okay, so implementing an innovation process. I mentioned this very quickly in the main room. I need to describe to you my background because this is not me being a guru and saying this is how you do it because I say so. It is based on very specific experiences and overlap in the process. So I spent 9 years in Sony. At Sony, my responsibility was launching new products into the European market. Quite often, these products had no prior experience for the organization or for the market. So this is a long time ago now, and it shows you my age, but I was responsible for launching the first digital still cameras in Europe. Does everyone remember digital still cameras? Because everyone now uses their phone. I also launched SonyStyle.com, which was Sony's first attempt to compete with Amazon, and I launched their first business-to-business channel. Because of that experience, Samsung took me on as a strategist for Northern Europe. My responsibility was make them #1 in 3 product categories: TVs, cameras, and phones. When Nokia, does anyone remember Nokia? Nokia was #1. Philips and Sony were still dominating, and local brands like Bang & Olufsen were also very powerful. Thirdly, I worked for Lego. Does everyone know Lego?
Yeah.
Okay. For those of you who are parents, I apologize for the price. It's very, very expensive stuff. I also apologize for when you wake up in the morning at night and step on a Lego brick and you scream in pain and then you scream at your children, didn't I tell you to put your toys away? Unbelievable products and lots of research done on the connection between hand, eye, mind and a Lego brick. So to reassure you for the money you've spent, it's a very good toy. I would suggest it's the only true toy. So for Lego, I was in charge of future branding. Everybody knows Lego. So what do we do next? And the CEO recruited me and a few other people to work on future scenarios. Future scenarios is a bit like the Shell scenario planning technique. And lastly, I'm a graduate of INSEAD. I did an EMBA there, what they call a global EMBA. So that was my first introduction to GCC. I would come to Abu Dhabi 6 times a year at least. I've just moved from Singapore. I just spent 3 weeks in Tokyo. And from Thursday onwards, I'm going to be a resident of Dubai. So I'm not going to be very far away. Okay, so that's me. In terms of the projects I've done, these are all the companies that I've actually taught innovation to. So Pepsi, for example, they shut down the head office. 50 of their senior managers came to the company I was working for, which is IDEA. And my role was to go through a 3-day workshop to introduce them to the processes. That was an interesting one, Homeland Security. We always had to meet in a very strange place at a very odd hour, and they took me through 3 levels of security in order to get there. And then these are the organizations I've done branding for. What I'm doing now, the reason I'm moving to Dubai, is based on the innovation processes that I'm used to. I'm actually involved now with teams where we're seeding 4D technologies where we're basically working on all of these areas. But, so that's me, so that's not what I'm going to talk about today. What I'm going to talk about today is a process where, for example, at Samsung, they applied this process, and I still remember the date when the brand value of Samsung overtook Sony. Okay? So I'm not interested so much in theory today. I'm very interested in the practical steps. Now, the reason I gave you my experiences, I said, this is not theory. I've got to describe to you what I've done. But of course, you're not just going to copy that. It's extremely important that you place these processes into the context of your own organizations, your own teams. I will not give you an answer that I can't back up with experience. So please ask those questions. If I don't know, honestly, I will say so. I will not make up an answer. So let's take a step back. And first of all, I ask the question, which is why innovation? I mean, before I put on the headpiece, I didn't understand the language of the panels. Innovation was the word I understood. And I lost count of how many dozens of times I've heard the word innovation in the last 24 hours. So why is innovation suddenly such a big thing? Why isn't this conference about branding? Why isn't this conference about manufacturing? Why innovation?
Creation.
Sorry?
Creation.
Creation.
Struggle.
Struggle.
It's all about sustain.
Sustain? You mean sustaining?
Sustaining your business, sustaining the future, sustaining the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I could show you something like this for any category, business category on the planet. So this is actually a piece of artwork, okay, but it absolutely shows you that for the kingdom to do Vision 2030 and to go beyond it, if you don't innovate, there's only two other ways that are recognized. You either do it cheaper, or you do it, quote, better. But different, cheaper, better, different. Different is all about innovation. So it's completely understandable that innovation is critical. Now, I was given this by the senior marketing director of a very big car company that I was doing innovation for. And what's scary about this is in a single road. So if any of you have been in London and you had to catch an early flight, and you woke up late and you rushed to Heathrow Airport, your taxi driver takes you along the road called the A4. And every single one of these adverts was taken in the same road. If you look at any business category that you're working in, I promise you that if you put the pictures side by side, it's actually very easy, it's very difficult to differentiate the product. And we spent ages creating a product that we're very proud of, and then when you put it in front of the consumer, they go, well, it looks exactly the same as the other one. We then, as leaders, do things like this. We come up with these wonderful mission statements at a top level down, and we have management meetings where we describe it to hundreds of staff, and we say, we're gonna have innovation at the center of everything we do, or customer service. And everybody goes, okay, that's great, and that's fantastic. But again, to the customer, it makes no difference. So to have a process that takes you beyond this in a very dramatic way, I hope, is actually not just a matter of being cool. It is a matter of survival. It is a matter of being sustainable. All right, let's get on with it. So, part one. I ask you now, you're all interested in innovation. All of these organizations I've talked about. By the way, I mentioned Samsung, Samsung and Sony. Apple actually uses this process as well. What do you think an innovation process begins with?
Idea.
Sorry?
An idea.
An idea?
I think with problem.
Sorry?
I think it starts with a problem.
A problem? Okay, that's interesting.
With a need.
A need, okay, a potential need of delight. Okay, all innovation processes that I've described and the organizations I've worked with, everything actually begins with observation. Formal observation. I'm going to give you some strategic examples of what we actually do at Samsung. Now, this is obviously a bit of a surprise. Okay, you're not sort of sitting in the lab, you're not sitting in the engineering department. So why do you think observation? I'm going to give you a simple test. Now, this test was given to me by somebody who does training at the US State Department for diplomats and ambassadors. I'm going to give you a little mission impossible. I'm going to ask you in 15 seconds to count. Sorry. I'm going to give you a piece of text. I'm going to ask you to count the number of F's that you see. Everyone's suddenly doing this and paying attention. And we'll see who gets the right answer. Okay, is everyone ready? What's wrong with my computer? Okay, so let's see hands. Who saw 5? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, anyone above 14? Okay, so we're going from what, 6 to 12? Okay, one, it's lunchtime and you haven't eaten. Okay, so I get that. Okay, but what's going on? Let me show you the text again. What's going on? Why are we having such a difference in something which is very simple? Just count a letter. Yes?
I just have a question. Why the word all has 3 L's?
Aha, I spotted it.
Yeah.
So this is what happens. The human mind is used to patterns and likes patterns. Okay? So your mind looks at the 3 L's, and as a result, you miss this F. Now forgive me, I've forgotten how many the actual number of F's is, but let me give you a trick, which is if you read backwards, and then count the number of F's and see how many there are. So does someone have the right answer?
9.
9. I think it's 9.
10.
Okay.
10.
11.
It's 11, actually, I think it's 11.
Yeah.
11.
Now, I have to tell you, once I gave a set of slides to a company I was presenting at in Germany, and they saw the error and got rid of all the errors, thinking that I had made a mistake, and it sort of ruined the test. Now, why is this used in training diplomats at the State Department? The lesson is this, is that if we go into a situation, we have expectations as to behavior, how somebody should dress, what is politeness. Do you shake hands or do you not shake hands? And if your mind that likes patterns is upset, you will not see the message that is being given to you. Something as simple as counting the number of letters, most of us got it wrong. So in a situation where you're not used to the situation at hand, you will simply not see what's right in front of you. So it's astonishing how many new innovations that come about, and you think, why didn't I see that? It was right in front of me. I take taxis all the time. Why didn't I come up with Uber? Okay, so the reason everything begins with observation is to beat this. The unconscious bias that we all have. And we have it in every single product category. And what's worse is that the more experience we have in our category, just say I make umbrellas or I do taxi companies, whatever it may be, the more experience I have, the more likely it is that I will dismiss something which actually could be very innovative. And it explains why so many entrepreneurs who have no experience in a category and therefore no biases will go into a situation and see the problems and delights that customers have that the established companies do not see. So I'm going to give you an example. This is one from Lego. So I was doing some training in New York. I woke up in the morning, I'm jet lagged, and this is a real family that was behind me. There's a mother doing the knitting, father is in the newspaper, and this little girl is in front of a computer. Now let me ask you a question. What's wrong with this picture? They're not talking to each other. Sorry? Now, what you said, actually the board of Lego went further. The board of Lego said that's child abuse. It is terrible that they're putting their child in front of the computer. Now, I gave you a biased question, which is saying what is wrong, but actually there's nothing wrong or right. It just is. So your ability to free up your teams to go out and observe consumers and just see with eyes what's going on, without judgment, without an unconscious bias, is the fundamental first step of innovation. Now let me give you some tricks to tell if an unconscious bias is in your organization and affecting your ability to look objectively. First one is the emotion of the corporate reaction. I'm going to give you an example, which is Nokia in a minute. Secondly, when you talk about what the competition is doing, you only share negative stories. I did a presentation at a hotel company. They only know negative stories about Airbnb. That's what they share. Oh, did you hear the story about somebody who stayed at Airbnb and they got robbed? So the fact that they've got this negative reaction gives you a clue that there's an unconscious bias going on. And lastly, which I've already mentioned, which is if you're a professional in your category, you're more likely to be dismissive of a potential new innovation. Okay. Let me just pause there. Any questions on what I've described so far? Okay. I'll give you a couple of examples. I did a project for a packaging company. Which do you think a very old person would prefer? Do you think they prefer this packaging or this packaging? This one? Who says this one? Okay, who says this one? That's the one, by the way, where you have to jam it in. Okay, my gut reaction was the one on the left. Now, this is an actual photographs of a lady that we visited in Germany. She has arthritis in her fingers, and it's very difficult for her to open the packaging that the medical industry thinks is easy for her. She has to use these nails. So we showed her the packaging that we thought would be difficult, and she was really happy. She said, yeah, I much prefer this one. And this is what she did. Okay? So she had a meat cutter, and she would go, just cut open the top. Okay? Now, I'm not suggesting that a pharmaceutical company should now be selling meat cutters. That's not the point. But my point is that when you go out and observe, it is astonishing. It is astonishing what you will find. So every project that I've done, that either we've taught in INSEAD, or that I've experienced in organizations that are like Apple, etc., everything begins with observation. Questions and observation. Okay, now, how do you do it? Some clues for you is that you do not go out and observe your typical customer. Okay? So your typical customer is the one in the middle. Your typical customer is somebody that you hope will, once you've come up with an innovation, will buy. What you actually do is go for what is known as extreme non-users and extreme users. Okay? I'm going to give you some examples of what I mean. Steve Jobs, as I mentioned in the panel, he had a great passion for Japan. And this gentleman, Yukio Shakanaga, Steve Jobs was fascinated by materials. And I hope you agree that when you compare it to the horrible kind of computers that used to exist before Apple introduced theirs, the material finish is incredibly important to Apple. So what Steve Jobs would do is he would find out people like him and get to understand what was it about their techniques that made such a difference. This guy makes teacups. Apple is never going to make teacups. Well, they might. Okay, but Apple is not. The point is that you are looking for extreme examples of experience. You are sending out your teams to understand those extreme levels of experience, and then making a difference to your products, which go after the mass market. Now, I'll give you a real example from Apple. I do not know who decided in the computing industry that all computers should be that horrible brown color. I mean, you remember them, right? Every computer was that color. I don't know if the plastic was cheaper, I don't know. And then Apple came up with these, the first iMacs, the first computers in a different color. Now, observation. Once they decided that they wanted to make computers in attractive colors, which extreme experience would you go observe where color is unbelievably important to making your product attractive? Where would you go? Sorry? Fashion.
Toys.
Toys.
Paint.
Paint.
Nature.
Sorry, cars. Cars. All very good examples. Sorry, one more?
Nature.
Nature, very good example. Let me show you what they did. They actually went to see candy manufacturers. And I think it's a very interesting example because, well, why would somebody want to eat these things, okay? So somebody once said, we eat things today that our grandparents would not recognize as food. And the candy, I would suggest that's high up in truth. So the fact that Apple went to see candy manufacturers, I find very, very fascinating. I find very fascinating. So what do? You're implementing an innovation process. You've got teams, I'll come on to teams in a moment, who you're going to send out there to observe. Before you go and send them there, you make a list of the extreme experiences that reflect the components of the product or service that you wish to create. Okay? Now, a second...
Excuse me?
Go ahead.
Question, please. How do you decide about the extreme visits? How do you know that they are, to identify them or...
It's a good question. It's a very good question. May I ask what industry you're in?
Education.
I'm sorry?
Education.
Okay, so a good example of education will be, I'm in education as well, reading materials. Okay, so let's talk about reading materials. You wish to improve the reading material experience.
Textbooks, for example.
Textbooks. So what is an extreme example where reading something under pressure is unbelievably important? I don't know the answer, but that's the sort of question I was
Stock
asked.
market, really?
Stock market, so Bloomberg. So I spent 2 days in Bloomberg. Bloomberg's headquarters in New York, they realized that reading information is unbelievably important. So they've got a concept where they combine cafe with reading. I don't have any photographs on it now, otherwise I would show you. So you see what I mean? It's a little bit of brainstorming, but the point is you've got to come up with the individual components of what you wish to innovate in, and then just go have a look. Now, there's no right answer to this, so going to see a car manufacturer for how they use colour is a good answer. There's nothing wrong with that. Or going to see fashion manufacturers who use colour. But I like the fact they use candy manufacturers, but this is not the only answer. So from your point of view, it's important just to try a few things. And frankly, I'd rather you try a few things than not do anything at all. Other questions? Okay, so let me give you some examples. This is a project that we did in Boston. This is an emergency room. Okay, an emergency room. Now, they wish to improve the emergency room experience. They want to become more innovative. What is an analogous situation to the emergency room? Okay, what situations are a little bit like that? So we just discussed, you want to do textbooks. Where do people read under pressure? Maybe the stock exchange. What's an analogous situation to an emergency room?
Quiet.
Sorry?
It's something that you need no noise, nothing.
Yeah, a lot of noise, a lot of people working under pressure.
Factory, workshop.
Factory workshop is a good one. Let me show you where we took them. NASCAR racing. So anyone watches racing, these guys are under pressure, they use equipment, and they have to solve a problem very, very quickly. So by taking the doctors and nurses to this situation so they can observe, an extreme example, they could make changes to their actual process. Another example, say you're an airline and your business class seat is unbelievably boring. Believe it or not, that's a new seat, which I find hard to believe. But anyway, so you want to improve. What analogous situations could you go and observe?
Football match, maybe.
Where else do you sit down a lot? Where else do you sit down in luxury?
Beauty salons.
Sorry?
Beauty salons.
Beauty salons, interesting one.
In a luxury car.
Luxury car. So Emirates yesterday launched their new first class seat, and they say very openly that they went to Mercedes, and they wanted to see how Mercedes designed a seat. Now this is not very novel. British Airways announced their first class seat a few months ago, and they said that they interviewed all of their first class customers as to what do they like about their luxury car seat. Okay? So the idea of observation and looking at analogous is an incredibly rich, you're not going to run out of ideas, where you can send your teams to observe and then come back with insights. Questions, doubts, ideas?
So basically you're observing different situations that I want to inspire new ideas, not observing the customers in the real life situation.
What you don't want to, yes, you do that as well, but what you don't want to do is observe a typical customer and doing a typical thing. You want to sell to that customer once you've come up with the innovation, but what you want to do is look at extremes. Okay? For inspiration. Now, keep in mind, if you, NASCAR racing, they're not trying to come up with an emergency room for NASCAR drivers. But by looking at these analogous situations, you can get inspiration for innovation.
But is this applicable for new product innovation or for incremental improvements on existing products?
Incremental is seductive. Incremental is like if something goes, say you've got a TV that goes at 100 hertz, you believe you're being innovative because you go to 120. Sony did a very expensive campaign where they had advertising all around Europe that said the new 200 hertz TV. And when we did research, we discovered that the majority of people had no idea what that meant.
Sure.
So for the company, it was very innovative, but for the customer, it didn't mean anything. In my opinion, when you do observations like this, it helps on both. If you do the process correctly, and keep in mind, I'm describing you the process now, I'm not teaching you the process. So one of the things we do when we teach the process is to sort of identify when you get those, oh my God, this could be huge, and then you get the leaps in innovation. But either way, you're going to be observing. Question?
I'm not sure if you're going to discuss that later on, but I mean, there are very few Apples, I mean, Facebooks and so on.
Yeah.
The majority of companies is pretty traditional. They've done what they've been doing for a number of years.
Yeah.
Maybe top level sees that and understands that, but getting this process down into the organization and making mid-level managers or even below that understand and act according to it is, in my opinion, very, very, very challenging. Do you have any experiences on that?
Yes, everybody does it. So I'm going to give you a strategic example in a minute of Samsung. Everybody observes. Everyone. So
So the question was a bit different. Samsung probably has that culture already included in their mindset.
Yeah.
A lot of companies that don't have that yet.
Well, then they're kidding themselves, in my opinion. They're kidding themselves if they say they want to be innovative. Because, I mean, keep in mind, I'm not suggesting this is the only process. I'm suggesting this is the process that I've experienced of in the organizations I've worked for. So it's a good question. Let me show you the Samsung example, the Procter & Gamble example. Okay, so these are the kind of questions that Samsung were asking when I first started getting involved in them. And I would suggest they're relevant to you as well, which is, the first one is very strategic, which is which are the countries that we wish to learn from. Now, I mentioned upstairs that it's completely appropriate that if we wish to learn about engineering cars, of course we will go to Germany. If we want to learn about fashions and clothes, we're going to go to Italy and France. If we want to learn about Silicon Valley, we go to America. I kind of get that. There's nothing wrong with that. And the reason that's important is because it's culturally led. I find it really fascinating that Germany has this unbelievable creativity when it comes to creating great cars. And I presented innovation to Lexus at their headquarters in Brussels. And their marketing managers told me they're so frustrated because they have proof, scientific proof, that a Lexus car is better than a Mercedes. They can prove it. And yet people think Mercedes is a better car. Okay, so there's something fundamentally going on there. So that first question, I would suggest, is really important. When I was at Sony, there were lots of stories about how the founders of Sony would go on 3-month tours of Silicon Valley and also the East Coast. And they just put a backpack on and they'll just go and learn and then come back. The founders of Toyota did the same thing. The last one, however, is a bit more subtle, and I'm going to show you an example of it. Samsung wanted to become leaders in design, and they decided that Scandinavian design was the culture they wanted to learn from. But it was a bit more subtle for them, because they thought if we can then sell our product back to the Scandinavians on the basis of design, we can then sell it all over the world. So what I said upstairs about choose the products you want to hate and choose the products you want to love, it's actually quite serious, because if you can work out exactly what those cultures or categories are and compete with, you've got a strategic goal that will drive your teams. I'm going to give you 2 examples. The first one is a simple product example. I did a project for Johnson & Johnson, okay? The simple Band-Aid. We've all used them. If I was now going to go observe how Band-Aids are used in order to get inspiration, so extreme situations, what sort of people would I be observing?
Children.
Children?
Housewives.
Housewives?
Workers.
Sorry? Workers. So the kind of workers we did, the Lynn, for example, it's a bit of a scary example, but Lynn was seeing a psychiatrist because she couldn't stop biting her nails. And every one of her fingers was covered in band-aids. Now, you're not, obviously she has a problem, but the point is, you're not trying to create a product for her, you're trying to get inspiration from her. Another lady, I think it was her, she's a kindergarten teacher. So the children are always falling over, so she's always using band-aids. Let me give you a strategic example. So this is the chairman of Samsung, and he decided we are going to be global leaders in design. That's it, our products are going to be the best design in the world. They had already done some preliminary research, and they had this idea that the kind of product that their culture created was very tech-driven and seriously commercial. So the ROI on the product was unbelievable, really, really good. That's what they were experts at. But when they looked at the kind of products that were coming out of some parts of Europe, they realized, you know what, some of these are, you want to have them in your home. So one of the designers at Samsung actually said to me, the problem with us Koreans is we understand beauty, but we have no idea what ugly means. Okay? So one of my roles was to do a 5-year program where every quarter we would bring top down to come and observe Scandinavian design culture, do workshops, and then they would take away the findings. And that kind of begs the question, which is going to be important to the kingdom, is it possible to combine what they consider to be the spirit of Samsung, Korean engineering, with a Scandinavian aesthetic and create something new? So the point was not just to copy Scandinavia, the point was to get inspiration, such that only the Scandinavians love the product, but the rest of the world would. Now, why do you think I put these pictures here? Very French building. Do you recognize it? It's La Défense in Paris, but it's a Danish architect. By the way, if you ever meet any Danes, don't mention this because then they don't stop talking about it. They're so proud. And this is an Australian building, but also a Danish architect. So this is an icon of Australia. When they advertise Australia abroad, you will see that building. It is designed by a Dane. So the argument was, yes, we can do this. So when I'm saying to all of you, go out and observe, get your teams to go out and observe cultures where you believe they're the best in a particular area, an element of your product, I am not suggesting that you merely copy, nor am I suggesting that the end result will just be a mimic of it. I am suggesting that if you combine it with the spirit, and I'm going to talk about this tomorrow in my talk, in my lecture, if you combine it with the spirit of your organization and the spirit of the kingdom, what it means to be somebody from this culture, then I think you'll come up with something new. So these are some actual photographs. This is the design, one of the design teams for for phones. And this was a 2-week immersion, and we literally took them into every aspect of Scandinavian culture. They ate the food, lived in people's houses, went shopping, looked at the packaging. We went into absolute detail. It was a very, very full-on program. Now, I'm going to give you an example of something that came out of it that resulted in a product that was a world beater. Okay, so these are the workshops we did at the end of each day. They noticed, which in fact even the Scandinavians didn't, they noticed that Scandinavians love white. And if you Google Scandinavian apartment, this is what you come up with, which is the first row. So the designers actually asked, why are the walls always white in Denmark? Why are the walls always white in Sweden? And I'm not kidding, I was there. The person went, oh, I'd never noticed. Okay, I'd never noticed. And it was the creative director of a major brand, it's called Royal Copenhagen, in Copenhagen, who came up with the answer. He thought about it, he said, yeah, you know, I've never noticed, but now I know why. And the reason is white is the best color on which to show color. White is the best color to show color. And so the designers went back to Samsung and created the world's first white frame TV. And sales skyrocketed. It was the first time there was a white TV instead of a boring black frame. Sales went very high indeed. And what I love, this is the advertising that I did in Denmark. was Imagine Danish Design. So I had everyone in Denmark paying attention to a Korean brand, which traditionally had been considered low quality, loving the fact that they had come to Denmark to learn all about Danish design and combine it with Korean engineering.
Isn't this a big functionality? Because we know black frame
Yeah.
comes from contrast.
Oh yeah, completely. They're not making this anymore.
Yeah.
They're not making it anymore. So there is a reason for it, but you understand what all I'm trying to demonstrate to you is by going to a different culture, getting those insights, using it to come up with new products, it's astonishing what you can do. This would not have come up in a brainstorm. In a brainstorm, you think of let's make innovative TVs. No one would have said let's make a white frame. Now this is one example. There's other examples I can give you. These pebbles. A lot of Scandinavian beaches are awful. They're not full of sand, they're full of stones. But Scandinavians love to walk on those beaches and they love to collect pebbles. So you can Google this. Samsung came up with a bunch of remote controls that were called the pebble remotes. And they were shaped like metal pebbles. And they were quite elegant and beautiful. And they were an additional purchase to the standard remote control that you got with the TV. So that's just a simple example. It came out for 4 years of observation. There are lots more examples I can give you. We also did immersions for them in the East Coast of America. So I took them to New York to see how New Yorkers live. We were always looking for extreme examples where they could go and observe. Any questions on observation? Okay, so who should do it? This is A.G. Lafley. He was the CEO of Procter & Gamble, a massive organization. And this is a quote of something that he said about observation. Now, there's a famous story in Procter & Gamble about how A.G. Lafley, on a monthly basis he did this, he would go shopping with a housewife. The housewife would not know who he was. And he would go to Walmart with her, they would go shopping together, and he would help her buy all the things to put into the basket. One lady was buying some of his washing powder, and he said to her, "What do you think of the packaging?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's fine, it's no problem." And then he said that he went home with her and helped her do her washing, and he said he was shocked when he saw that by the side of the washing machine, the lady had a screwdriver, and she would bang holes in the top of the packaging and rip it off. So on Monday morning, he sent an email to his packaging people saying, "We need to sort out the packaging." But that wasn't the point. The point was that he was out there observing, and he was very open about it. So I have to begin this part of it by telling you, leaders absolutely have to show the way. Absolutely have to show the way. This will not work if you send the new people in the company to go do some observation while everyone does the real work. This will only work if you demonstrate that this is a serious culture change in our organization, and I am going to take time out as a leader out of my business schedule to go and spend time with our everyday consumers. It sends an unbelievably powerful message through the rest of the organization that this is something that we're going to do seriously. This lady, I worked with her for 6 years. She was the CEO of Samsung for Northern Europe. And she would show that that's what she was doing. So on a monthly basis, she would say, I'm not going to be in the office that day. I'm going to be doing X, Y, Z observations. So from the top down, it was always seen. To be frank, it's good fun. Okay. So when I was teaching this process at Pepsi, the Pepsi senior managers, head office, top 50 people, they loved it. So they loved putting on jeans and sweatshirt and going out and seeing how people drink Pepsi products and the competition products. Okay, because they never get a chance to do it. So what's interesting is that when you call it an innovation process, something very serious, going and doing something as simple as spending time with your customers suddenly becomes something very innovative, as opposed to something you should be doing anyway. The next kind of person who should do it, and this is for you as managers to identify, is what they call T-shaped people. So not everyone in the company is going to observe. Okay, you can't send everyone out all the time. Now this is a definition of a T-shaped person. These are managers in your organization who are very good at one functional aspect of execution, but have been in your organization long enough so that they understand how the other functions work. Why is this important? Why T-shaped people? Yeah.
Because observation is not, theory-led free. You have to have a knowledge, a background, to consciously observe something.
Absolutely right. Okay, so say for example, you produce, what should we say? Say you produce water bottles. The person you send who's an expert at the manufacturing, he sort of understands how they do the labeling. You send somebody else who's an expert in the labeling and sort of understands all the other bits. They can work as a team. Okay? So once they've done the observation, it's extremely powerful to see these groups of people then interacting with each other and actually behaving like entrepreneurs. Actually start behaving like entrepreneurs. And the third sort of person is people with empathy. Now this is a tricky one, because all of us think that we understand other human beings. Most of us don't. Most of us don't. To me, this is a very good description of what is empathy. Empathy is getting a balance between what somebody says, what they do, what they're thinking, and what they're feeling. You may not list it that way, but somebody with empathy has an ability to sort of look at all of those areas simultaneously. There are lots of tests out there, okay? So lots of psychological tests to discuss who's got the best empathy. As leaders, as human beings, I'm sure you know in your own organization the people who have empathy. So to send out to do observation, yourselves as leaders, T-shaped people because they're functional experts, and people with empathy is a very rich group of people to be constantly observing. Okay, any questions on the type of people? Okay, once you've done the observations, you come back with something, you develop something called points of view. Now, all I'm doing now is describing to you what you do. Of course, I'm not describing to you the technique. But a point of view is really critical to the next part, which is brainstorming. So I'll give you a couple of examples. This one applies to airlines. Okay, this is actually an insight from an airline that I was working with. And this is sort of before 2001. And let me work on the first one first. So, you go out and observe that no one likes music systems. Okay? Does anyone remember the Walkman? Okay. Now, I was at Sony when the Walkman was very popular. Sales meetings were very boring because we would look at every market and every demographic in Europe and everybody was buying Walkmans. Yeah, another successful Walkman. To use a Walkman, you had to have something like this. Now these were fantastic music systems, okay? So there's a lot of competition to make the perfect music system. So you had a music system, you had a record, you had CDs, you had cassettes. You then put the cassettes into the music system. What is Sony's bias? Remember what I said at the beginning? The unconscious bias. What's Sony's bias? Think about the cheap Walkman versus the expensive Walkman. What's the difference?
Income level?
Yeah, absolutely. Look at the product, okay? Their bias is this. So if you buy a better product, it should have more buttons on it. Is anyone here into audio systems? No one? That's a shame. People who like high-end audio systems love buttons, okay? They can't just switch on a piece of music. They've got to do all of this, and then they go, shh, listen, listen, listen. And then they play a piece of music, and they even love when nothing is playing. So they love the powerful silence. They go, my music system is so good, you can't hear the silence, which is a bit strange. But anyway, what's Apple's bias? It's the complete opposite. Okay, which is the better the product, the simpler it should be. Now, if I asked you what is Apple's brand, most of you would probably say it's innovation. It's never been innovation. It's actually simplicity. Okay, it's actually simplicity. So, from their very first product, anything they look at, they ask themselves, how can we make this more simple? And that impacts every aspect of the way that they work. So even their advertising, when they launched the iPod, deliberately only had 3 colors to give that image of it. There's a lot of ways you can show innovation. This is a great way to show simplicity. So when Apple came along and their bias was simplicity, Sony had the bias of the better product, more complex should be. Who do you think is going to win? Okay. Who do you think is going to win? Simplicity, exactly. Now the other example I gave you, other point of view I gave you was this one. Now this is actually true. If you interview families in England, a lot of them will say, we want to go to Disneyland because there's lots of things to do for everybody, and the weather's always good in Florida, which is not true, but nevertheless that's what they think. So you can imagine, therefore, that it's straightforward for an organization like Emirates to come up with something like this. You go out and observe, you're looking at extreme users for inspiration, which happens to be families with children, and in this case they come up with something which applies to children, families with children, but actually applies to anybody. I have to say, don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying Emirates is like the best in the world, but I am suggesting Emirates Airline do understand this process. It's evident in some of the things that they do. With that insight, we then do this. Now, what is this a consumer journey for? It's having a holiday. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. You need a break, you do some research, you plan, you decide. So this is a project that I worked on for an Indian holiday company. And what we did was, we went and observed a lot of very stressed people in the cities around this holiday destination to work out what do they like to do, what do they think about when they think of taking a break. And this is the project room. So at the top we had photographs and interviews with people that we went and observed. Then in the middle we had the insights, so we started mapping out. And again, forgive me, I'm describing something, not teaching it to you, but you work out what are the insights that you're coming up with. It's a little bit like the points of view. And then this is the brainstorm when we came up with ideas for execution. Okay, can you pause please? The next part is confidential.